Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mitzvah Hashem. Today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Really, we are beginning on Kuf Pei Vav Amud Beis. We are holding on Kuf Pei Vav Amud Beis on the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Lamed Tes Siv Hey. We have a nice bit of Mishnah Berurah to do here on Kuf Pei Vav Amud Beis. If you take a look, you'll see that there's a lengthy Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Lamed Beis on Siv Hey, but it's not really very complicated, and Kuf Pei Zayin is quite short, so I'm actually wondering if today's share might be on the short side, but let's see. Usually when I say that, it ends up stretching out. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesunim Batzara Ubashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yetziam Yitzara L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'ora Mishibur L'Geula, Hashta B'Golav Azman Kariv and Emaramein. Our learning should be a schus Refuah Shalema for Esther Fradel Bas Chana, Moshe Meir ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Chavadasa Bas Serol, Rivka Bas Shira Leah, Yoshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, and Gila Shifra Bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a Refuah Shalema B'Sayich Shar Chayla Yisrael. And the B'schus, the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael B'chol Makom Shehem in this crazy world and crazy times during which we live. Okay, so previously in Sif Daled, we learned two halachas negea to marriage. We learned that you're not allowed to make either kiddushin or nisuin on Shabbos. So to put it in terms that we usually deal with, when you go to a chasana, what's the kiddushin? Kiddushin is when the chassan takes the ring. He says, "Harei b'kadesh asli b'tabasu kadas Moshe v'Yisrael." He puts the ring on the kala's finger. He has just effected kiddushin. He was kaina, and I'm using that term very loosely right now. You know what? Let's replace it. Let's not say he was kaina her. He was mekadesh her. He effected kiddushin by giving her a ring, which is something which is worth at least a shava pruta. So he effected kiddushin. Where is nisuin in our marriages nowadays? Well, the truth is that we use various forms of nisuin to effect nisuin because we're concerned over machloikesin, and we want to make sure that we have a proper marriage. So we use more than one method to effect nisuin. But the nisuin that you're going to see when you're at a chasana and you're in the chuppah room is chuppah. What is chuppah? Well, you've got that canopy, and the chassan and the kala are underneath that canopy. Something that you don't usually see if you're just a guest by a chasana is that at the beginning of the chasana, the manager of the hall came over to the chassan and had the chassan make a kinyan to acquire the makom hachuppah, so that the makom of the chuppah, the area that is underneath the chuppah, belongs to the chassan. What's the point of that? The point is that when the kala comes in to under the chuppah, when the chassan is machnis the kala underneath the chuppah, the kala is coming into the chassan's rishus. And by being machnis her into his rishus, by bringing her into his rishus, that is what is affecting nisuin. Now, we use another method to affect nisuin also, and that's going to come up in today's discussion, and that is yichud. After the chuppah, the chassan and the kala, they dance them over to the yichud room, and now they're isolated in the yichud room. They go into the yichud room all alone, they lock the door, there's Eidei yichud, they're in the yichud room. That is another method that we use to affect nisuin. Now, we learned at Sif Dalet, you're not allowed to make kiddushin on Shabbos. You're also not allowed to make nisuin on Shabbos. But the reason is not the same for each one. You're not allowed to make kiddushin on Shabbos because gzeira shema yichtov. We're afraid that if you're going to make kiddushin on Shabbos, you might come to write. Well, you come to a chasana and you come to the chassan tish, one of the first things that you see is you see the Rosh Hashiva and the chassan and the parents, and they're sitting there and they're filling out the ksuba. So definitely writing is very closely related to kiddushin. So you can't make kiddushin on Shabbos, not because there's anything inherently anti-Shabbos in making Kedushin, it's an Issa D'Rabbanan, because when you make Kedushin, Gzeira Shema Yichtov. There's a Gzeira that you might come to writing. So that's why there's an Issa D'Rabbanan of making Kedushin. Why can't you make Nisuin? Let's say the Kedushin was made on Erev Shabbos. Let's say, Hareat Mekudesh Sliba Tabasu Kedas Moshe Yisrael, with the Eidim and everything else, but there was no chuppah. They did it without a chuppah. You don't need a chuppah for Kedushin. He could give her the ring and do the Kriyas Ksuba and everything else. You could do that without a chuppah. The brachas of the Sheva brachas, different story. That's brachas Nesuin, different story. But you could affect the Kedushin without a chuppah. So let's say the Kedushin was done on Erev Shabbos. Could you now do chuppah on Shabbos? Could you do Nisuin on Shabbos? The answer is no. Nisuin is also not allowed to be done. We had that. The Ein Kainsin we learned in the previous year. Why? So the Mishnah Berurah told us this is a different problem. The problem is that Nisuin is what affects the complete kinyan. Even though we have everybody knows the Mishnah, the first Mishnah, Masechtas Kedushin, Ha'isha Niknis B'shloisha Drachim, right? But Kedushin does not affect the complete kinyan. And we could see that in halacha. The halacha is that once a man and a woman have Kedushin and Nisuin, should the woman pass away, the husband inherits her. Once a husband and a wife have Kedushin and Nisuin, if the wife finds something, Mitziasa Labaila, whatever she finds belongs to her husband. So there are halachas that come into play after Kedushin and Nisuin. But these halachas do not come into play after Kedushin before Nisuin. Chas v'chalila, a woman were to pass away between Kedushin and Nisuin, the husband would not be the Yorush. He would not inherit her assets. So we see that Kedushin does not affect a complete kinyan. And that's why the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Daled was very careful to tell us that the reason you're not allowed to do Kedushin on Shabbos is not because it's Doima Lemekach Umemkar. It's not because he's making a kinyan. The reason you're not allowed to do Kedushin on Shabbos is because Gzeira Shema Yichtov. Nisuin, on the other hand, is what affects the complete kinyan. Since Nisuin affects the complete kinyan, you're not allowed to make Nisuin on Shabbos because Nisuin is Doima Lemekach Umemkar. So both of them are an Issa D'Rabbanan for two different reasons. We learned all this already in Sif Daled. Now in Sif Hey, we're going to learn something interesting. We're going to learn that all of this that we learned in Sif Daled, right? You can't do Kedushin, you can't do Nisuin, Gzeira Shema Yichtov, Doima Lemekach Umemkar. There's a different halacha that pertains to when a man is marrying a woman who has been married before. If a man is marrying an almana, a widow, she was married previously, or he's marrying a grusha, he's marrying a divorcee, she was also married previously, now we're going to learn that there's a new halacha. What's that halacha? They're not allowed to have the bia rishona. They're not allowed to have intimate relations for the first time on Shabbos. Kedushin, still going to be a problem because they can't do the Kedushin on Shabbos because Gzeira Shema Yichtov, you might come to writing. Nisuin, chuppah, really, for the almana and for the grusha, we're going to see not necessarily a problem. But bia rishona, that's a problem. Why is the bia rishona a problem? The bia rishona is not a problem by the basula. By the girl who was never married before, if you made Kiddushin and Nisuin on Erev Shabbos, they could have the bia rishona Friday night. So if they got married Friday afternoon and they got married Thursday night, and they had Kiddushin, Chuppah, Yichud, right? Now they want to have bia rishona on Friday night. That would not be an issue. That would be fine. But by almana or a grusha, the bia rishona cannot take place on Shabbos. Why is that? So first we could just read the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber Sif Hey, bottom line in Kuf Pei Vav Beis. Ha'koines es almana, when somebody marries an almana, married previously, or the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us the same halakha applies to a grusha. La yava yaleh bia rishona, they cannot have the bia rishona loy b'Shabbos v'loy b'Yom Tov, not on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov. Now let's take a look at the very beginning of Mishnah Berurah's Kat Lamed Beis, where the Mishnah Berurah in 2 lines is going to tell us why. Then we're going to choose through some of the details of this. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Lamed Beis, Ha'amana, Bia Rishayna, can't do on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Hatam, the reason for this is, De ba'almana v'chein begrusha, by a woman who was married previously, an almana, a widow, or a grusha, a divorcee, their halacha is different than a girl who was never married before. Why? Kevan shehi bu'ula, since she has already been married and she was already intimate with someone, ikar hakinyan liyerushasa ulamaisa yodeha. This change in status, in halachic status, that by a basula is affected by chuppah, by a basula, once she has chuppah, so she has nisuin through chuppah, now her halachic status changes. She is now completely acquired by the husband, and we spoke about 2 manifestations of this, right? Yerusha, the husband would inherit her assets should she pass away. Maisi Yodeha, if she has earnings, the earnings go to their husband. But that's true by a basula, not by a ba'ula. Ba'almana v'chein begrusha, kevan shehi ba'ula, since she was previously married, ikar hakinyan liyerushasa ulamaisi Yodeha, hi habia v'loy hachuppah. By almana and grusha, that change in status is not affected by chuppah. It's affected by bia, the nimtza, and therefore the problem is that by almana or grusha, if they have the bia rishayna on Shabbos or Yom Tov, nimtza kikaina kinyan b'Shabbos. Now it's doimel lebeka chumemkar, because by doing the bia rishayna, that's when you're completing the kinyan. That's when now her halachic status changes, and now if she passes away, the Baal is the Yerush. If she finds a Mitzia, it goes to the Baal. If she has earnings, they go to the Baal. By an Almana or a Grusha, that's all affected by the Bia. It's not affected by the Chuppah. So now we understand the Nafkamina. Ba yo besula, can't do Kedushin, Gzer Shema Yichtov. Same problem by an Almana or a Grusha. Ba yo besula, Chuppah, can't do that on Shabbos. It's doimel lemeka chumemkar. Why? Because the chuppah affects her change in status and completes the kinyan to the husband. By an almana or a grusha, it does not. By almana or grusha, the chuppah doesn't make that change. By almana or grusha, what makes that change? The bia rishayna. So now the bia rishayna is an act that's doimel lemeka chumemkar. So by almana or grusha, you can't do the Bia Rishayna. Okay, now, before we go through the rest of this Mishnah Berurah and chew through the details of this, one thing that the Mishnah Berurah does not explain, because Ein Kan Mokum Laharach really, this is not really the place for it, we're in Arachayim, not Neven Oezer, but everybody's got to be wondering, why is this so? Why this difference between the Basula and the Ba'ula? So there are different reasons that are given. I'll give you one that's, I think, very easy to understand. And that is, there's a huge difference in perspective between the basula, the girl who was never married before, she's getting married for the first time, and the ba'ula, the woman who is an almana nebuch, a widow, or a grusha, or a divorcee. Very different perspective. What's that perspective? Everybody knows. You have the basula, the girl who was never married before. She's coming into the chasana, she's going to the chuppah. This is the first time that she's ever done this. Right? It's a huge deal, and her mindset very much when she goes to the chuppah is that she's being makna herself to her husband. She's giving herself over to marriage. She's giving herself over to her husband. And the whole atmosphere, the whole process, the whole ceremony of the chuppah and everything else is very impressive. It's very significant. It has tremendous significance to this girl who was never married before. And the truth is, the intimate relationship that's going to come later is something that she doesn't even understand, really. It's something, Baruch Hashem, she doesn't have any experience with. She doesn't know what it is. She doesn't know really what to expect. She definitely doesn't understand yet how that affects the relationship between husband and wife, how that forms the bond between husband and wife. Like the pasuk says, the pasuk in Bereshis. So, but this is all beyond the Kala and the Chassan's knowledge. It's beyond their experience. It's out of their expectation. For them, the chuppah is a huge deal, right? Take a look at the face of the Chassan and the Kala, right? After the chuppah, right? They break the glass, Yishama Bari Yehuda, take a look at their faces. It can light up the whole room, right? Now they're married. So by a girl that was never married before, the chuppah is significant enough to affect these changes in halacha and to complete the kinyan. Not so by an almana or a grusha. An almana or a grusha has been down this road already once. It doesn't have the same pop. It doesn't have the same significance. It doesn't make the same impression on them as it did the first time. Also, they now know what comes later. They know what's down the road. So they know that, okay, the chuppah, fine, it is what it is. But they know that the Bia Rishona, they know the relationship that they're going into. They understand, and it's within the realm of their experience to understand that there's a deeper relationship and that there's something more significant that comes next. And therefore, by the almana or the grusha, it's the Bia Rishona, not the chuppah, that completes the kinyan and makes that halachic change, and that's why, by an almana or a grusha, the Bia Rishona can't take place on Shabbos, while by a basula, it can. Now, we're going to choose through some of the details here in the Mishnah Berurah, and what we're going to see is that even though the Mechaber uses this lashon of Bia Rishona, right, if we walk away from the Mechaber and from the first two lines of Mishnah Berurah's Kat Lamed Beis, so okay, fine. And I hope Rabbi Weiss just did a very good job of explaining it very well, that you can't do the Bia Rishona because it's the Bia Rishona that affects the kinyan. But we're going to see now, it's not really the Bia Rishona. It's not really the actual intimate act, the intimate relationship, the first time. As much as it has to be a yichud that's re'uya l'bia. They have to be isolated. They have to have a yichud ha're'uya l'bia. They have to be locked in a private room with the ability and the time and the halachic ability to be intimate. That yichud ha're'uya l'bia, that will affect the kinyan even by an almana or a grusha. So it's not necessarily the Bia Rishona as much as it's the yichud ha're'uya l'bia. Let's take a look here in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah. V'ayin be'Evan Ezer Siman Samach Daled Sifhei. Take a look at Evan Ezer Siman Samach Daled Sifhei. The Be'er Shama Mechaber, that the Mechaber explains over there, because over there it's Makom Laharich. It's in Evan Ezer. Daf Bal Mono Loi Be'inan Bia Mamish. We don't really need an act of intimacy in order to affect the kinyan. V'sagi im hoisa yichud ha're'uya l'bia. If they had a yichud ha're'uya l'bia, which again, what does that mean, yichud ha're'uya l'bia? It means that halachically she's permissible to him, meaning that she's not a nida, she's tahor. So it has to be that she's halachically permissible to him. It has to be that they're isolated, they're alone in a room with complete privacy, so they're alone in a room with the door locked, no one's going to walk in on them. And it has to be that they have enough time. So if it's a yichud or re'uya l'bia, that is enough liknoisa al yidei zeh kinyan gomer. That would also affect the complete kinyan. Lemehevei kinesua l'chol davar. It will make her a nesua in every sense of the word, so that the husband will now be her yoirish, ma'aseh yadeha labayla, mitziyasa labayla, etc., etc. V'cheinu skimu harbe poskim. Ulefizeh. Now, according to this, now the Mishnah Berurah is going to walk us through the math. Ulefizeh, according to this. If somebody married an almana or a grusha on Erev Shabbos, meaning Kedushin, they did Kedushin on Erev Shabbos. V'hoisa tahora, and she's not a nida, so she already went to the mikveh, and she's muteres labayla, she's tar, she's not a nida. V'hichnisa achar ha'chuppah lecheder miba'od yom, and now the chassan and the kala, they go into a yichud room, v'nisyached ima, and they're totally isolated. V'lo hayu sham b'nei adam, There's nobody else there. Empty room, it's just the chassan and the kala, and the door's locked. Kaina oisa kinyan gamor. Now he was kaina har on Erev Shabbos. So again, if somebody married an almana or a grusha on Erev Shabbos, and they did a kedushin, and then after the kedushin, they went into a room, into a yichud room, all alone, and they locked the door, and she's tahar, so she's muteres labaila, and the door's locked, and they had enough time, so it was a yichud or re'uya labia. So now they made a complete kinyan. Now, even though we're dealing with an almana or a grusha, Friday night they could have the bia rishona, because there is no mekach umemkar. She already had a complete kinyan through the yichud or re'uya labia. But what if on Friday she was still a nida? So let's say Friday was her last day of Shiva Nikiyim. Now, you could make Kedushin, right? You have a chuppahs nida, it happens. So you could do Kedushin on a woman who's a nida. Now, it so happens that this woman is going to be able to go to the mikveh Friday night. So they made Kedushin on Erev Shabbos. Can't make Kedushin on Shabbos. So they made Kedushin on Erev Shabbos. Right? But now, the truth is, they wouldn't be allowed to have yichud haru'uya labia. You can't have yichud haru'uya labia with a woman who's a nida, because she's usher to him. So you wouldn't be allowed to have yichud haru'uya labia. Now, some of you might be scratching your head, wait a second, I'm a married man, I have yichud haru'uya labia with my wife who's a nida all the time. What do you mean? Yeah, you're not allowed to have yichud you're not allowed to have yichud or re'uya labia with a woman, even though she's your wife, you just married her, because you never had bia with her yet before. Before the bia rishona, you're not allowed to have yichud or re'uya labia if a woman is a nida. So again, you made kedushin on Erev Shabbos, but this woman is a nida. So now, even if there was yichud, it's not going to be able to be yichud or re'uya labia, and it's not re'uya labia because she's a nida. So it's not yichud or re'uya labia. So says the Mishnah Berurah, if she was a nida on Erev Shabbos, they didn't have proper yichud, which they're not allowed to do. Also, Shabbos. Then you can't do the bia rishona on Shabbos. It's very simple math. If the woman was a nida on Erev Shabbos, this almana or a grusha, so then you did not have yichud or re'uya labia. If you didn't have yichud or re'uya labia, there's no complete kinyan yet. Well, then when is the complete kinyan going to happen? Bia rishona. Now you can't do the bia rishona on Shabbos. It's very nice you'll go to the mikveh Friday night, but you can't do the bia rishona on Shabbos because that would be daimel mekach umemkar. Velochein, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, yesh lizar ma'od. You have to be very careful. Kisha'oisen chupas almana be'erev Shabbos. If you make a chuppah with an almana or a grusha on Erev Shabbos, you have to be very careful. Sheyasu as a chuppah miba'od yom gadol. Make the chasana early on Erev Shabbos, kedei sheyeroy liyachid ima'achar chuppah, so that there's time for a proper yichud haru'uya labia to effect the complete kinyan. And that only works if she's tahira, if she's not a nida. V'dan, you should know. The Harbi Achrayim Kasur, many Achrayim write, the afilu bibesula, even by a psula, even by a girl that was never married before. Yesh lizar lechatchila, we should take care lechatchila, sheyis yachadu achar chuppah be'erev Shabbos miba'od yom, that they should have a proper yichud haru'uya labia on Erev Shabbos, even by a besula. Why? The Yesha Oimrim, because there are shittas that say the chuppah shalanu, what we call a chuppah, where we make a canopy on poles and we bring them under the canopy, loy mikri adayin chuppah is not a real chuppah. It doesn't affect nisuin. V'hi k'mekudeshes palma. It's only kedushin. So there are shittas that hold that what we see in the chuppah room is really only kedushin. The chuppah cannot affect nisuin. This chuppah that we make. V'im kain, and if that's true, then kishabah le'ala balayla bia rishayna hu kaina kinyan b'Shabbos. So in other words, what he's saying is like this. The Mechaber is telling us this halacha by almana or grusha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, there are those that say that this halacha might apply to a basula also. In other words, if you only make kedushin, you give her the ring, and you only make what we call chuppah going under the chuppah canopy, and you don't make a yichud haru'uya labia, There are shittas that say that you haven't affected nisuin, because there are those shittas that say that even by a basula, what we call chuppah doesn't affect nisuin. Well, in that case, when is the nisuin going to happen? The nisuin is going to happen by the Bia Rishona. Well, then you can't do the Bia Rishona on Shabbos, because it's Daimel HaMekach UMemkar. However, the Mishnah Berurah tweaks this a little bit. And he says that by a basula, you don't need yichud hara'uya l'bia. By a grusha, almana or a grusha was married before, you need a real yichud. You need a yichud hara'uya l'bia. By a basula, you don't need yichud hara'uya l'bia. V'loi be'ina dafka yichud hara'uya l'bia. V'lachein, and therefore, by a basula, afil im ha'isa nida, even if the kala is a nida, so it's not a yichud hara'uya l'bia because she's also to him. Or it's not 100% private. They're in a room and people are walking in and out, so it's not royal labia. That would still be chuppah gemura by a basula. V'kaina b'basula kinyan gamor lemehevei kidasua b'chal advar. So here's again a difference between the basula and the ba'ula. By a ba'ula, it's the Chaber started off here in Sifei saying that it's the Bia Rishona that makes the kinyan. The Mishnah Berurah walked it back a little bit from the Mechaber and Even Ezer and said, no, it doesn't have to be the Bia Rishona, it could be Yichud Hara'uya L'Bia. Now we're talking about a basula. By a basula, there are those that say that what we call chuppah doesn't affect nisuin. You need yichud to affect nisuin. But by a basula, it doesn't have to be yichud ru'uya l'bia. It could be stam yichud. It doesn't have to be ru'uya l'bia. And therefore, the yichud would work to affect nisuin even if the kala is a nida. So that's why nowadays you have a chuppah's nida, there's still kedushin and nisuin. Because there's the kedushin, there's the chuppah, which according to some affects nisuin, and then there's yichud, even if it's not yichud ru'uya l'bia, it can't be yichud ru'uya l'bia. The chassan has to own the yichud room. Therefore, if kanes is a basula be'erev Shabbos, praktish geret, if you're making a chassan on erev Shabbos, v'hichnes oisa l'cheder mi'ba'od yom, and they have yichud miba'od yom, av sheyadayin loy tavla, even if she's a nida, but they had yichud. Ubnei adam nichnasin v'yotzin by zecheder, and it's not 100% private, the yichud room. People are coming in and going out. And he puts it in the brackets, the balavach yasur lehisyakin might kind of be a rishona, which has to be. If the kala is a nida, then you can't do traditional yichud, right? Traditional yichud nowadays, the chassan and the kala go to the yichud room, they go inside, they lock the door, the eidim try the door to make sure it's locked, the eidim check the room first to make sure nobody's in there, they stand guard. It should be technically a yichud ru'uya l'bia. But by a chuppah's nida, if the kala is in nida, you're not allowed to do that. Because if the kala is in nida, the chassan and the kala are not allowed to have yichud ru'uya l'bia. Because they didn't yet have a bia rishona and she's usher to him. So they're not allowed to have a yichud ru'uya l'bia. But it doesn't matter, says the Mishnah Berurah. Because by a basula, you don't need yichud hara'uya l'bia in order to affect nisuin. And this goes back, I think, to what I spoke about at the beginning of this year. When you're dealing with a chassan and a kala, where the kala is a basula, she's never been married before. Probably the chassan also hasn't been married before. The intimate relationship is beyond their expectation yet. It's beyond their experience. They don't know what it is. So just the yichud alone, even if it's a yichud that's not ru'uya l'bia, just the yichud alone is enough to affect the complete kinyan to make her kinesua. And then she'll go to the mikveh Friday night. They could be intimate Friday night, because they already affected the complete kinyan by the yichud, even though it was a yichud that was not ru'uya l'bia. Well, if he's according to this, I feel a b'chupas basula, even by the chuppah of a basula, yesh lizar lechatchila kishois and a chuppah be'erev Shabbos. If you make a chassan on erev Shabbos, sheyasu a chuppah m'ba'id yom gadol, you should make the chassan early on Friday, so that there's time for a proper yichud to make sure that there's a complete nisuin, and to make sure that there's no shaila of making a kinyan on Shabbos when they have the Biyur Rishona on Friday night. Okay, let's just do a little bit more here. Turning to Kuf Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber, top line, Sivav, also la'adam lahishit b'mayim davar lahilicha bi etzloi oy lahaviyoi etzloi. Interesting halacha. We learned one of the halachas, one of the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos is lahishit, lashut. You're not allowed to swim. You're not allowed to go swimming in the Nahar, right? Why? You might go ahead and build some kind of life preserver, right? We spoke about they would weave reeds together and make some kind of flotation device. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. That would be makabeh patish tikkun moneh. So you're not allowed to go swimming because of a fear that you might create this flotation device. Now, says the Mechaber, not only are you not allowed to go swimming, you're not allowed to float something on the water on Shabbos. So you want to float something away from you, you want to send a message to the other side of the river, or you want to bring something on the water to you, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to float things on the water on Shabbos. Also, you're not allowed to float something on the water, either to make it float away from you, or to make it float to you. And therefore, the Mechaber gives an interesting manifestation of this. Kismim mishal pnei hamayim. If you have water and there's twigs and sticks and stuff floating on top of the water, aser lahavtzilon lekan lekan. You're not allowed to take your hands and push them to the sides. Kedei lenakois hamayim shiyu yafim. I don't know, you're standing by the river and you're looking in the water and you want to be able to see the nice, beautiful, clean water and see the fishies swimming around. But there's twigs and leaves and everything on top of the water. So you want to stick your hand in. You're not going swimming. You want to stick your hand in and you want to push the stuff away on the surface of the water. You're not allowed to do that because what are you doing? You're floating something on the water to float it away from you. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah Gimel. Also, la'adam. Interesting. Why is this also? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Somehow, this is part and parcel of the gzeira that you're not allowed to go swimming on Shabbos. You're not allowed to go swimming on Shabbos because when you go swimming on Shabbos, you are floating yourself in the water. Remember, we learned it means the issur of going swimming on Shabbos has to be that both feet are off the ground. So you're floating yourself on the water on Shabbos. Not only are you not allowed to float yourself on the water, you're not allowed to float other things on the water. The Levush over here says that it's not so much that it's just like included in the gzeira against swimming. The Levush says it's the same problem. Why? Because the problem by swimming is that you might make a chavish hachayotin. You might go ahead and you might make this flotation device for yourself. Says the Levush, when you want to float something on the water, we're also afraid that you might go ahead and form some kind of keli in order to put something on it and float it away. So again, it's a problem. It's a gzeira that you might come to makabeh patish and tikkun moneh. Also, you're not allowed to push things away that are floating on the surface of the water. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he qualifies this. This only applies in the river, in the lake, in the ocean. But if you're talking about a keli, right? So you want to float things in the sink, or a man-made pond, sheyesh loy safa, a swimming pool that has an edge that's not doimet to a nahar, like Gazru, Kamashin is Parlamayla. He brings us down from the Achronim. Let's go a little bit weiter. Says the Mechaber Zayin. Svina, a boat. Are you allowed to go onto a boat on Shabbos? You walk by the park, there's a nice lake, there's a rowboat. Are you allowed to go into the rowboat on Shabbos? Svina, imi yosheves bekarka hayam, if the keel of the boat is sitting on the ground, on the riverbed, so it's not moving. It's not floating. It's not floating on the water. It's sitting on the riverbed. So if that's the case, then you're allowed to go onto this boat. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it's not floating, but if it's floating, also you're not allowed to go onto the boat. Pram, or any kind of a ferry. kishat ba'atzmai. To go onto a boat so that you're floating on the water in the boat is included in the gzera of just going into the water directly and floating on the water. Okay, we're going to pause over here. We'll continue further in Siv Zayin next time. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This listen to limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua Sefuros Panos and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias God Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.